ever stop to think about like the environmental impact of all your software? And I'm talking about the apps you use every day, the websites you visit, even that email you just sent, it all takes a toll on the planet.
Yeah, that does.
So today we're going on a deep dive into the world of green software.
Hmm.
And helping us navigate this is Naveen Balani's guide.
It really is a field that often gets overlooked. But, as we rely more and more on technology, we really have to understand the impact it's having.
Absolutely. So let's break it down a bit. What does green software actually mean?
Well, at its core, it's about considering the environment every step of the way, from when you first design the software to when it's finally retired. It's like, if you were building a house,
Hmm.
you wouldn't just use recycled materials for the walls.
Right.
You'd also think about the energy efficiency of like the windows, the appliances, the overall design. Green software takes that same big picture approach.
So it's a lot more than just remembering to turn your computer off at night.
Way more. It gets into the nitty-gritty of coding, like how to write efficient code that uses less energy. It's about choosing the right hosting providers, ones that use renewable energy,
Okay.
and even optimizing how often your software updates. It's really about minimizing the environmental impact of, well, everything we do in the digital world.
That makes sense. But I'm curious, how much of a difference can this really make? I mean, do apps and websites really have that big of a carbon footprint?
It might surprise you. Think about those massive server farms, the data centers that power the internet.
Right.
They use a huge amount of energy. And unfortunately, a lot of it comes from fossil fuels.
Right. I've seen pictures of these data centers, rows and rows of servers. What's the connection between inefficient software and all that energy consumption?
Imagine you have to find one name in a giant phone book. You could go line by line,
Yeah.
which is kind of like running a linear search in software. It gets the job done, but it takes forever. Or you could do a binary search, which cuts the search area in half with each step. Way faster.
And much more efficient.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Inefficient code is like that linear search. It makes the servers work harder than they need to, which uses more energy and creates more heat. Efficient code helps data centers run more sustainably.
So poorly written code is like leaving the lights on in an empty house?
Exactly.
Are there any companies like leading the way in making their software greener?
Absolutely. Google's doing some really interesting things. They're using AI to manage their data centers, to optimize cooling systems, and their goal is to use entirely renewable energy by 2030.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Yeah, these changes they're making could save enough energy to power a small city.
That's really impressive. It makes you realize what a difference those kinds of optimizations can make. And speaking of efficiency, I was curious about this whole hardware versus software thing. I mean, are they both equally important when we talk about green software?
They're totally connected. Think of it like this. You could buy a really high-end electric car, top of the line, super energy efficient. But if you're driving it like a maniac all the time, you're not going to see those fuel savings.
So it's like having a sports car, but driving it like you're stuck in rush hour traffic.
Exactly. We need both energy-efficient hardware and optimized software working together.
Okay.
And this is going to be even more important as we see more specialized chips. These are chips that are designed for very specific tasks, and they can be incredibly energy efficient.
So it's all about making sure the software speaks the hardware's language.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so let's say I'm a developer and I'm ready to embrace this whole green software philosophy. How do I even begin to measure the carbon footprint of what I'm building? Is there like a carbon counter on my laptop?
Yeah, you won't find a physical counter, but we do have something called the software carbon intensity, or SCI.
SCI.
Think of it as a nutrition label for your code. It gives you valuable information about its environmental impact.
Okay, so how do you measure something like that?
Well, the SCI score represents the total carbon emissions caused by your software.
Yeah.
And that's divided by a functional unit. So you might look at the amount of carbon emitted per user or per API call. And this score, it actually breaks those emissions down to two categories: operational and embodied emissions.
Okay, I think I'm following. Tell me more about these different types of emissions.
Sure. Operational emissions, those are the emissions created while your software is actually running, like it's active energy consumption. Embodied emissions are a bit trickier. They consider the entire life cycle of the hardware that the software runs on, so everything from manufacturing to disposal.
It's like a hidden cost we don't often think about.
Exactly. And the SEI helps to quantify those embodied emissions so we can see how much of the hardware's footprint is coming from the software's use.
It's like that realization that Your cup of coffee in the morning, yeah, it's just one cup, but it's part of a much bigger system. There's a whole footprint there. This is all really interesting stuff. In the next part of our deep dive, let's talk about the tools and techniques that developers can actually use to lower their SEI score and build more sustainable software. So we've talked about measuring a software's carbon footprint, but what can developers actually do to shrink it? What are the tools and techniques they can use?
Oh, there's a ton of really cool stuff out there. Like if you're working with Python, there's this tool called codecarbon.io,
Okay.
and it basically analyzes your code and tells you how much carbon it's emitting.
Mm.
And then for folks using AWS, there's their customer carbon footprint tool, which helps you track emissions related to your cloud usage.
It's like having a little eco-conscious buddy looking over your shoulder as you code.
Exactly. And those are just a couple of examples. There are tools for every stage of development. So
Hmm.
you've got your cloud-based platforms that can analyze your whole infrastructure.
Right.
And then you've got AI-powered solutions that can actually optimize your code
Mm.
for energy efficiency.
That's wild. It's amazing how much innovation is happening in this field. But beyond the tools, what are some things that developers can do, while they're actually writing code to make it more efficient, more sustainable?
Well, one really important aspect is memory management. Think about it like packing a suitcase. If you just throw everything in there, it's going to be a mess. But if you carefully organize everything, you can fit more in and avoid unnecessary weight.
Okay.
And in software, efficient memory management is kind of like that. You're making sure that memory is being allocated and released effectively so you don't run into those annoying out-of-memory errors. It keeps things running smoothly.
So it's all about writing smarter, more efficient code so you don't have these wasted resources.
Exactly. Another cool technique is caching. So think about how your web browser remembers a website you visit often,
Right.
so the next time you go there, it loads faster.
Makes sense.
Caching is kind of similar. You store frequently accessed data in a place where it's readily available, which reduces processing time and energy consumption.
It's like taking a shortcut, you know?
Yeah.
Less effort, faster results, and a smaller impact on the environment.
Exactly. And even these small optimizations, when you apply them consistently throughout a project, can lead to significant energy savings.
That's pretty cool. It's like you're shifting your mindset from just make the code work to make it work beautifully and sustainably.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to another really important part of green software development, the software lifecycle.
Right. We can't just think about the code in isolation.
Exactly. Software isn't just created and then disappears. It goes through a whole life cycle,
Yeah.
from that initial design phase all the way to its retirement. And every single stage has opportunities for eco-conscious choices.
So walk me through that a bit. What are some of the key stages where we need to be paying attention to our impact?
Well, it really starts with the design phase, right from the get-go. Choosing the right architecture for your software can make a huge difference. Have you heard about serverless architecture?
Vaguely, but I'd love to hear more.
Okay, so imagine you want to bake some cookies, but you don't own an oven.
Okay.
Instead of going out and buying a whole oven just for one batch of cookies, you rent one for the afternoon, you use it, and then you're done. Serverless architecture is kind of like that. You're only using and paying for the resources you need when you need them.
So it's about being really strategic and scaling your resources as needed.
Exactly. And once the software is built, continuous monitoring is super important. Think of it like having an energy meter for your software.
Okay.
So you're tracking its resource consumption in real time. That way you can spot any inefficiencies and, optimize them quickly.
So you're constantly keeping an eye on things, making adjustments along the way.
Right. It's less about finding one magic solution and more about having that mindset of continuous improvement throughout the software's entire life.
A constant journey, not a destination.
Exactly.
And speaking of journeys, let's talk about the future a bit. You mentioned earlier that data centers use a ton of energy. What if we could make software that was smarter about, where that energy comes from?
That's the idea behind carbon-aware computing.
Carbon-aware computing? That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It might sound futuristic, but it's closer than you think. Imagine a video streaming platform that automatically lowers the video quality during peak energy demand, when the grid is likely using more fossil fuels.
So instead of that annoying buffering wheel, maybe we get a slightly lower resolution. It's a small price to pay.
Exactly. Or think about a company that schedules its data-heavy tasks for times when there's a lot of solar or wind power on the grid.
Oh, interesting.
That's called time shifting. We can basically align our energy consumption with the availability of renewables.
That's amazing. So we're actually teaching software to be mindful of where its energy is coming from. That's really neat. Are there any real-world examples of how this time-shifting idea is being used?
Yeah, actually. Real-time energy data APIs are playing a big role there. So, for example, let's say a company has a batch processing job, something that's not super time sensitive.
Okay.
They could use an API to schedule that job for a time when the energy grid is mostly powered by renewables.
That's incredible. So it's not just about the software itself being efficient, it's about being smart about when and where you run it.
Exactly.
But how do you get everyday people like me to care about all of this? Because I think a lot of people are just worried about whether their internet is fast enough. They're not really thinking about how green their software is.
You're absolutely right, and that's why user education is so important.
Yep.
We need to make the carbon costs of our digital lives more transparent. Like imagine if streaming services showed you the carbon impact of different video qualities, or if your email provider gave you a little nudge to schedule emails for off-peak hours.
I like that. Those little reminders can be really effective. It's like those signs in hotels that say, your neighbors are reusing their towels to save water. It makes you think about your own consumption.
Exactly.
But beyond those nudges, what about the role of AI? We talked about how it can be used to optimize data centers, but isn't AI itself a big energy consumer?
That's true. Training those massive AI models everyone's talking about takes a huge amount of energy. In fact, did you know that training just one AI model can have the same carbon footprint as 5 cars over their entire lifespan?
Wow, I did not know that. It sounds like AI is kind of a double-edged sword in this whole green software equation.
Yeah, it is. But it also holds enormous potential for good. We've already talked about how it can manage cooling systems in data centers and even predict hardware failures. And as AI technology gets even better, we can use it to design even more energy-efficient software, create smarter power grids, and even optimize how we use energy in our homes and businesses.
It's encouraging to know that AI can be part of the solution as we work towards a more sustainable future.
It really can.
So it sounds like there are a lot of promising avenues for making our software greener. Are there any other trends on the horizon that you're particularly excited about? So it sounds like there are a lot of promising avenues for making our software greener. Are there any other trends on the horizon that you're particularly excited about?
Well, we've touched on it a bit already, but serverless architecture, that's really gaining traction, and it's just incredibly efficient. Companies only use the computing resources they need when they need them.
Right, like renting a car for the weekend instead of owning one that just sits in your driveway most of the time.
Exactly. And then another really interesting area is edge computing.
Okay.
And that basically means moving data processing closer to the user, so we're less reliant on those big energy-intensive data centers.
So instead of my data traveling all the way to a data center and back, it gets processed closer to home.
Right. And that makes things faster and greener.
I like it. What else?
Oh, and there's a big push for international standards for green software. So, like establishing clear guidelines for what sustainable software development actually looks like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like having a universal language for sustainability in tech.
Exactly.
It seems like governments are also starting to pay attention to this movement. What role are they playing in encouraging green software?
Yeah, they're definitely becoming more involved. Some governments are putting regulations in place. So companies might have to be more transparent about the carbon footprint of their software and hardware.
Okay.
And then others are using incentives, things like tax breaks, to encourage greener practices in the tech sector.
That's great. So it feels like we're moving towards a more sustainable digital ecosystem. But it's not just up to big companies and governments, right? What about us as individuals? What can we do on a personal level besides like supporting companies that are making an effort?
Well, I think a lot of it starts with just being more aware and making conscious choices about our digital lives.
Hmm.
For example, do you really need to stream that movie in 4K? Or would HD be good enough?
Right.
Could you delete some old emails instead of keeping them in the cloud forever? Little things like that.
It's like being more mindful about our energy use in other aspects of our lives.
Exactly. Every click, every download, it all has an impact, even if it's small. And don't underestimate the power of just asking questions. Like you can ask companies about their sustainability practices. You can ask about green features when you buy new software or hardware.
Right. It's about sending a message that we care about these things.
Exactly.
But beyond the technology itself, what about the people who are actually building it? How can development teams do a better job of integrating sustainability into their work culture?
Well, I think it starts with education and giving people the tools they need. Developers really need to understand why green software is so important, and they need to know what they can actually do about it.
It's about empowering people to make a difference in their own work.
Yeah. And make sustainability part of the conversation right from the beginning, not something you think about later. So you could have sustainability metrics as part of your performance reviews. Or you could encourage the team to use more efficient programming languages. You could even have workshops on green coding practices.
So it's about creating this environment where everybody feels like they can contribute. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We talked about the hidden costs of our digital lives, and we looked at some of the amazing solutions that are being developed in this whole world of green software. What would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners today?
I think the most exciting thing is that this is really just the beginning. There's so much room for innovation in this space. And it's amazing to see how technology and sustainability are coming together like this. And as more developers and companies and just everyday people embrace this idea of green software, I think we can create a digital world that's not only innovative and efficient, but also sustainable.
It's like we're on the verge of something really big here. Sustainability isn't just a nice to have, it's becoming a core principle. So here's something for everyone to think about. What if every line of code, every app, every website was created with the health of our planet in mind? Until next time, keep it green, everyone.